Good morning and welcome to the worship service of the Unitarian Universalist Church in Idaho Falls. My name is Arthur Cole, today's worship associate. On this beautiful morning, we bid you welcome, who come with a weary spirit seeking rest, who come with troubles that are too much with you, who come afraid and hurt. We bid you welcome, who come with hope in your heart, who come with anticipation, who come proud and joyous. We bid you welcome, who enter this virtual hall as a homecoming, who find in these people a family. Whoever you are, whatever you are, wherever you are on your journey, we bid you welcome. We have a few announcements this morning. For one, the UU Men's Group will meet this coming Friday, June 11th, at Bill Cohn's house at 216 Cobblestone Street in town. Then also, I'd like to remind you that the UU Church will not have services in July. The last service will be on June 27th, and that is the Sunday that the Unitarian Universalist General Assembly will have the Sunday service. So we'll provide you with the link in the weekly email so you can tie into that service, which actually starts at 10 o'clock and not 10:30 as usual. Please note that if you have joys, concerns, sorrows, and milestones that have affected your life in the recent past, and that you would like to share with the congregation, you can do so by posting them in the chat box on the right of the screen. Thank you. We also invite you to join our virtual coffee hour after the worship service by clicking on the link provided in the email inviting you to today's service. Also, we will not have a dedicated time for an offering, but encourage you to sustain and support this church by making a generous contribution. You can do so either by mailing a check to the Unitarian Universalist Church in Idaho Falls at P.O. Box 50376 in Idaho Falls with a zip code 83405, or by going to the church's website at idahofallsuu.org. On the home page, in the connection menu, click on Donate to get to the contributions page. I invite you now to enter into the spirit of worship with the following words. May we be reminded here of our highest aspirations and be inspired to bring our gifts of love and service to the altar of humanity. May we know once again that we are not isolated beings but connected in mystery and miracle to the universe, to this community, and to each other. Please join me in reading the Church's covenant, which is printed in the order of service. Love is the spirit of this community, and service its law. This is our great covenant, to dwell together in peace, to seek the truth in love, and to help one another. We will now light the flaming chalice to illumine this day with thoughts by the Reverend Christine Robinson. We gather this hour as people of faith, with joys and sorrows, gifts and needs. We light this beacon of hope, symbol of our quest for truth and meaning, in celebration of the life we share together.
Good morning. Our call to worship this morning is the poem My Heart Soars by Chief Dan George of the Tsleil-Waututh Nation. The beauty of the trees, the softness of the air, the fragrance of the grass speaks to me. The summit of the mountain, the thunder of the sky, the rhythm of the sea speaks to me. The faintness of the stars, the freshness of the morning, the dewdrop of the flower speaks to me. The strength of fire, the taste of salmon, the trail of the sun, and the life that never goes away, they speak to me, and my heart soars. I invite you to join in our opening hymn, number 21, For the Beauty of the Earth.
Today's Time for All Ages is Tales of the Land, read by Elizabeth Coyote, Director of Lifespan Faith Development. Listen to the wind. The land has tales to compose. The gray clouds, the passing birds tell us a story, told by roll of hill and the wind's wild vibratos, the softness of the deer's ear, trapped in time by death. The storms gather over the desert, thence to the high hills. Listen to the wind. The land has tales to compose. Gone are the roving tribes of yesterday, living lightly, replaced with fixed towns and planted farms cumbrous to the land. The magpie's chatter echoes over the black rocks of ancient calamity. Listen to the wind. The land has tales to compose. The new hard roads pin the land down and hold it tight to old patterns as it tries to shift with the seasons. Do we belong in this place, this wide plain of sky, hills and twisting river? Perhaps we do not. Listen to the wind. The land has tales to compose, told by roll of hill and the wind's vibratos. The end.
We now dedicate time to our joys, concerns, sorrows, and milestones, a time to share with this religious community events that have affected your lives or our lives in the recent past, and to speak out for those we want to hold in our thoughts. Drew White will read your joys and concerns while we light a candle for you.
So we have a joy from Molly and Tom Brinkerhoff. Tom and I just added a puppy to our family. His name is Apollo, and he is very sweet. That's great. We also have a joy from Victoria McDonald. She says, longtime friends are visiting, and it's so much fun to freely discuss politics, friends, and hike through the rainy rainforest. We have another joy from Bob and Roby. Yesterday was our 53rd wedding anniversary. We celebrated by buying flowers for the patio. So congratulations to Roby and Bob. And then another joy from Amanda Logan. Drew and I, so that's me, we will be visiting my family in South Carolina next weekend for the first time since before the pandemic started. And we'll be meeting our nephew for the first time, who was born last year. And that's all we have in chat.
Thank you. We light one last candle to lift up these joys and concerns, as well as the ones that remain in the silence of our hearts.
Our reading this morning is from the book Landscapes of the Sacred, Geography and Narrative in American Spirituality by Belden C. Lane. To experience a place as sacred is to participate knowingly or unknowingly in a whole history of cultural tensions and conflicting claims, even ecological shifts in the terrain itself. At the same time, sacred places also participate in the entire array of sensory exchanges that play across the land, reaching far beyond the impact of human influence alone. The motion of wind through the limbs of a juniper tree in a red rock canyon, the long-tailed magpie that leaves seeds of a distant wildflower in its droppings beside a small arroyo, the shifting of rock in a fissure caused by water erosion. These, too, are part of the dynamic reciprocity that makes up the ambient character of any desert monastery or roadside shrine. Michael Taussig, in his Mimesis and Alterity, would suggest that the human understanding of the meaning of place emerges out of a process of imitation of all the differences that we discern there. We mimic in language and action the full range of sounds, movements, and other sensory perceptions that come to us from the more than human world. Only in this way do we begin to make sense of it. The place, in other words, demands its own integrity, its own participation in what it becomes, its own voice. A sacred place is necessarily more than a construction of the human imagination alone. I invite you now to join in watching a short film called Tsleil-Waututh Nation, People of the Inlet.
When the Great Spirit made the saltwater inlet that now has the city of Vancouver on its shores, he placed my family on the land. We are Tsleil-Waututh, people of the inlet.
The quality of life was fantastic. It was a life of abundance. There was great quality of food source. There was abundance of lush forests and cedar trees that were used to house our people and used for canoes and in our artwork. And it was a disciplined life as well. The work ethic was impeccable because it had to be. To harvest a tree back in the day, it took a lot of time, a lot of work, a lot of energy.
When I am out there in the mountains or, by the streams or rivers, I feel very connected to our elders who have been here for, thousands and thousands and thousands of years. I feel like I am walking with them when I am out there. And so, I feel not only honored, but, blessed to be able to walk with them in that way.
Coast Salish people moved around within their territories. So that really meant that Coast Salish people had responsibilities and obligations to that land and water. And it was like that because the people needed those resources to live. It was like that because that's the sacred trust and responsibility that was given to us by the Creator. It's in the Indian River Valley. It's within our whole traditional territory. It's in the protection of the land and the water. It's trying to rehabilitate the beaches so that someday my own daughter could learn how to dig for clams on the beach and exercise those Aboriginal rights.
As our ancestors before us, we carve, we weave, we drum, we dance, and we celebrate our culture.
As important it is for Tsleil-Waututh people to be stewards of the land, it's also important for us to carry out the cultural aspects of ourselves. It is strong through families. There are several different families in our small little nation that are the carriers of art. They are the ones that carry that gift of being able to create art. There are those that carry those gifts and those strengths of song and dance. And there are those people that carry on those strengths and gifts of legends and storytelling. And then we also have people who are very strong in politics and governance. All those things have to come together to stay together.
It's that feeling of family. It's that feeling of connectivity to who we are as a people. And also, they're a celebration of who we are. We are distinct.
When I watch the children dancing, everything becomes light. You can tell that the music touches their spirit and they want to become that eagle. They want to soar through the sky. They're connected.
The songs and the dances and the drum beat really are about our connection to the lands, and they're a celebration of our connection to the four-legged, to the environment in which we live, and individual songs and have stories and have meaning. And the drum beat is about our heartbeat and how we're connected to other people as we all live and breathe the same.
It's the one thing that we own yet is our spirituality and our drums and our dances. And it'll never leave us. We won't let it. I can hear the drums all the time.
In our cedar canoes, we must work together to reach our common goals and keep an even keel. We carry this spirit in all our endeavors.
We live in this amazing environment and part of the world. We're bordering the Broad Inlet, We're at the base of Mount Seymour. And for us, we've built this whole ambiance of we're inviting people in to reside with us and live in our community. I have a lot of respect for the people that come in and engage, because at the end of the day, every single individual living at Raven Woods is allowing us to build our community and build our nation. In past, we were hunters of the land. We harvested the land, and we had all the resources to survive. And the tools of yesterday were bows and arrows. And today, we're modern day hunters. And the tools of today are education, degrees, diplomas, relationships, partnerships.
We are coming back to being able to do those kinds of things is testament. It's strong testament to who our people are, to who our elders are. Being able to bring us to this point where just being is a big thing. And we're able to not only be who we are, but we're also able to take care of that obligation. We're able to uphold that Snuaith, uphold that teaching, that law.
My great-grandfather, he used to paddle up to Indian River to hunt for deer, and that's when the wolves were still around, and he'd give his wolf call. By the time he got to the beach, there was a deer there for him, and he'd shoot the deer. And he'd always leave a hind quarter for the wolves, and then he'd thank them, and then he'd leave. So the next time he came up again, he'd give his call. The wolves would corral a deer and chase him towards our great-grandfather. And then he'd do the same. He'd get his deer, leave a hind quarter for them, and bring the rest home.
And my vision is for this nation to become independent, collectively and individually, so that they live out the quality of life that they deserve.
Our people traveled far and wide on our traditional territory. They paddled our waters and roamed the sacred mountains. They lived in harmony with the richness of our traditional territory. We are the caretakers and protectors of our inlet and the stewards of the land and water.
I have always been fascinated by geography and maps, and I'm especially intrigued with the origin of unusual place names I encounter. Many places, for example, have names that indicate the feelings of European settlers about the land they beheld, for better or worse. Places like Paradise Valley, New Heaven, Sabbath Day Pond, Death Valley, Hell Creek, and Devil's Courthouse. When we drove across the country from Rhode Island to Idaho, we passed Purgatory Chasm in Massachusetts and Devil's Tower and Hell's Half Acre in Wyoming. With so many places in America named after the Prince of Darkness and his abode, it seems that geographically at least, the devil certainly gets his due. And before the land was colonized by Europeans, the Native Americans who lived here for tens of thousands of years had their own place names, of course, and throughout America, many places retain their Native American origin. I was born in Chattanooga, for example, which is a name of uncertain Creek or Cherokee origin, thought to mean place where the rock comes to a point. It is no doubt a reference to the rocky point of Lookout Mountain, which looms above the city across a bend in the Tennessee River. Sometimes these Native American names represented a geographical reference landmark like Chattanooga. But in other cases, the name is associated with something more mythological or sacred. All along the Southern Appalachian Trail, for example, you cross places such as Wallacee, which means Great Frog Place in Cherokee, referring to a giant mythological frog encountered there. Or Cleman's Dome, the highest point in the Great Smoky Mountains, whose Cherokee name, Kuahi, means mulberry place, which is believed to be the sacred home of the white bear, the great chief of all the bears. Native American spirituality considered all of nature as having living, sacred qualities, and it was common to recognize some places as special, though modern European eyes would likely not see their significance. And this phenomenon is mostly true around the globe. The sacredness of a place is typically unique to a local people in their spiritual beliefs. And it is especially the case among people who still live more closely with the earth. But there are some exceptions. It is easy to understand why a place of magnificent natural beauty or unique wonder would be revered as sacred in the human imagination. Places like Mount Katahdin in Maine, or Devil's Tower in Wyoming, known by various Native American names such as Bear Lodge or Tree Rock. But it is often very ordinary places that gain this distinction for some reason. Mount Everest may be the highest mountain in the Himalayas, but it is a lesser peak, Mount Kailash, which is believed to be the home of the Hindu god Shiva and his family. It is a mountain considered so holy to Hindus, Jains, and Buddhists that climbing it is forbidden, and each year thousands of pilgrims circumnavigate its base on a 32-mile path, many of them crawling on their knees. And for many Unitarian Universalists, Walden Pond has become a sacred pilgrimage site. But even Thoreau remarked about the commonness of this pond on the outskirts of Concord. Nowadays, on a hot summer day, when the pond is swarming with swimmers and picnickers, it feels anything but holy. Some places seem to possess a natural, ineffable sacredness apart from humanity that we can sense, while other places are imbued with sacrality by human presence and rituals, sometimes over the span of millennia. And of course, both aspects can be true of the same place. Consider the Temple Mount in Jerusalem, which is a rocky outcrop higher than the surrounding hills. The archaeology indicates it was a natural holy site for ancient peoples who lived in the area for thousands of years before the Jebusites, Canaanites, Israelites, and other tribes that are mentioned in the Bible made it a sacred place of their own. According to Jewish tradition, it was the spot from which the world was created and the first human Adam was made. It was also the place where Abraham bound Isaac and prepared to sacrifice him until his hand was stayed by God. More historically, it was the place where Solomon built his temple, later destroyed by the Babylonians, and where Herod built his temple, which was destroyed by the Romans. And since the 7th century, the site known to Muslims as Haram esh-Sharif has been the home of the Al-Aqsa Mosque complex and the Dome of the Rock, two of the holiest places in Islam. During the Crusades, the Templars venerated the Dome of the Rock as the site of Solomon's temple, naming it Templum Domini. There's probably not a more consecrated and more contested patch of earth around. Two of the best examples of human sacralized places for me are also in the Holy Land: the Church of the Nativity in Bethlehem and the Church of the Holy Sepulchre in Jerusalem, both built to mark a sacred location from the traditional story of Jesus, one the site of his miraculous birth, and the other the site of his resurrection. Though I do not believe in the historicity of either event, when I visited these ancient churches and saw the smooth stone worn down by centuries of pilgrims who came before me, I could not help but feel a sense of a sacred something there around me. It was as if the beliefs of so many people had imbued the very ground with an undeniable holiness with their presence. Admittedly, it may be that I picked up on this feeling because of my exposure to Christianity in my youth and my appreciation of the theological and historical significance of these places. But I suspect even someone from an altogether religious tradition would notice the sacred vibe there. So where does this sacred vibe come from? Why is it that some seemingly ordinary places just seem to attract humans in some mystical way? To begin to understand this, we need to embrace what Belden C. Lane calls a circular hermeneutic, a kind of circular approach to explaining this interesting phenomenon. As he writes, from one point of view, place creates people. But it is equally the case from another point of view that people create place. We form significant locales out of our memories, our relationships with others, a whole network of associations, sacred and profane. So let me unpack this a little more. What Lane is saying is that people and place are intertwined in a complex relationship that can be examined through the lens of many disciplines, from anthropology and sociology to geology and spirituality. Each has shaped the other over time. In recent times, when people relocate around the globe more than they used to, it may be harder to see this. But in people who have lived for millennia in the same region, for example, the Shoshone-Bannock tribes and their ancestors who lived in this area for possibly 12,000 years, sacred places have become woven into the narrative of the people. And the people have become part of the ecosystem itself. European colonization disrupted this significantly, but the relationships were never completely broken, and some sense of the mythological understanding of the land remains. This can be hard for most of us schooled in the tradition of Western civilization to understand. After centuries of theology that separated nature from spirituality and the demythologizing impact of science, we may appreciate the aesthetic beauty of a sacred place, but it can be hard to accept the idea that holy places can partake of mystery in their own way, without trying to recover some of that lost magic out of nostalgia. By reinterpreting our myths through critical judgment, which is a worthy endeavor, we have lost some of the awe and wonder in our experience of place. As Annie Dillard said, we doused the burning bush and cannot rekindle it. We are lighting matches in vain under every green tree. In other words, we cannot expect to experience a landscape as a numinous series of spiritual encounters the way our ancestors once did. But this does not mean we must dismiss our relationship with sacred places altogether. As modern spiritual seekers, we must integrate the sacred and the mundane into a more realistic and holistic worldview, engaging both our intellect and our feelings. Getting back to the idea of the circular hermeneutic, as Lane writes, for us, any thorough experience of sacred space will have to follow this deliberate pattern of mystery, demystification, and the subsequent reawakening of wonder. It is this reawakening of wonder that begins to open the door to the mystery of a sacred place. A paradox of a sacred place is that part of the sacredness comes from the way we understand and experience its spiritual significance. From a socio-cultural perspective, the holiness of a place is in the eye or perhaps the heart of its beholder. One person's sacred circle of stones can be another's nondescript circle of rocks. One person's holy mountain is just another mountain to others. This dilemma has created numerous conflicts between indigenous people and colonial powers for centuries, and it is still ongoing in places like the Black Hills of South Dakota, the Amazon rainforest, and Mauna Kea in Hawaii. Indigenous people have largely lost the historical battles in these asymmetrical power struggles with corporate and government interests. But recent resistance is starting to make a difference. From a spiritual perspective, one can be in a declared sacred place without really being there at all. It is important to be spiritually present in a sacred space. John Muir famously said that between every two pines is a doorway to a new world. But how often do you feel such a mystical connection entering the forest on a typical walk in the woods? I know that I sometimes do, but more often I don't. It is a spiritual practice that I am actively working on, but sometimes the noise and activity of a trailhead parking lot leaves me unsettled until I can get far enough down the trail away from people. I don't think Muir had such problems. Moving deeper into the mystical approach to sacred places, it is important to note that many people consider listening to the earth through the senses to be a real experience and not just a poetic metaphor. It is a call to be open to a deep connection to a place that has ancient roots in shamanic practices and more contemporary supporters, from the transcendentalists to some modern psychologists. The English writer D.H. Lawrence spoke of the spirit of a place as having a subtle magnetic or vital influence inherent in every specific locality. And the philosopher Mircea Eliade suggested that there is something about our physical experience of sacred places that is qualitatively different. And in just the last couple of decades, several depth psychologists, including Craig Chalquist, have begun to explore the idea of terra psychology. It is based on the premise that the earth and places have a soul that we may encounter in the symbolism of our dreams and by other means. This, they say, is true of any ordinary place. And as far as sacred places, a terra psychologist would say they are special locations imbued with strong spiritual power, where this exchange can more easily occur. And they invite us in. Chalquist admits that such ideas are contrary to Western thinking, and he acknowledges the criticism of terra psychology as a form of animism or human projection. But he points to human reactions to places that defy simple explanation as grounds for further exploration. Another example of ongoing psychological research in this area concerns so-called earth empaths. As described in a 2017 article in Psychology Today, earth empaths are a special type of empath who is keenly attuned to the natural world and all of Earth's changes. The beauty of a waterfall can exhilarate or energize these empaths, whereas the toxicity of air pollutants can make them feel sick, exhausted, or depressed. Any of us who care deeply about the earth and the diversity of life are more likely to feel stronger emotions about environmental issues. And I can commiserate with feeling sick, exhausted, and depressed about this at times. But earth empaths claim a more direct connection to earth spirit. Now I realize that the idea of a place having a soul or communicating with humans probably sounds a bit far-fetched or too new age for many of you, and I can understand why. As a religious naturalist, I am skeptical about extending consciousness to what science considers inanimate matter. And it is too easy to make such claims without providing a testable mechanism for such communications with the earth. It is an intriguing area of research with lots of spiritual implications, though, and I will continue to follow it. And of course, these ideas are hardly new. They align with what shamans and sages have been suggesting from the beginning of human spirituality. I have also had some uncanny encounters with nature that invite me to explore such ideas. One example that I will share with you is the relationship my wife and I have enjoyed with Blood Mountain, which is the highest point along the Appalachian Trail in Georgia. According to tradition, the name of the mountain comes from a battle between the Creeks and Cherokees when the mountaintop supposedly ran red with blood. More likely, the story is merely a legend, since the craggy summit is often covered with red-tipped lichens. Blood Mountain was also venerated by the Cherokee, who believed the Nunnehi, a race of immortal little people similar to fairies, lived in a lodge under the mountain. The weather on Blood Mountain is often terrible, and many hikers on the AT complain about not seeing the spectacular vistas from the summit due to rain and fog. Marty and I, however, have never experienced poor weather or visibility on the summit in the dozens of times we have hiked the mountain in every season, even if we started off in pouring rain at the trailhead. After reading about the mountain as a sacred place many years ago, we have always made a practice of pouring out a water offering to the Nunnehi when we reach the summit. We don't really believe in immortal little people, but just saying. So my hope this morning was to explore the idea of sacred geography with you through a variety of lenses and perhaps inspire you to think about some of these ideas with a bit more in nurturing your own relationship with the earth. There are lots of places around us that are considered to be sacred sites, and others all around the world you might explore. I would love to hear about your own encounters with sacred places and nature. No matter how you feel about sacred places, I believe you will find visiting such places to be a rewarding spiritual experience. I invite you now to join in our closing hymn, number 308, The Blessings of the Earth and Sky. Our closing words of the poem To Ailsa Rock by John Keats. Hearken, thou craggy ocean pyramid, give answer from thy voice, the sea-fowl screams. When were thy shoulders mantled in huge streams? When from the sun was thy broad forehead hid? How long is't since the mighty power bid thee heave to airy sleep from fathomed dreams? Sleep in the lap of thunder or sunbeams, or when gray clouds are thy cold coverlid. Thou answerest not, for thou art deep asleep. Thy life is but two dead eternities, the last in air, the former in the deep. First with the whales, last with the eagle skies. Drowned wast thou till an earthquake made thee steep. Another cannot wake thy giant size.
Please join me now in reading the words for the extinguishing of our chalice flame. We extinguish his flame, but not the light of truth, the warmth of community, or the fire of commitment. These we carry in our hearts until we are together again.